We're just on Title 23. Let's go around and identify ourselves for the record. Starting with, come on, Sherry, you can start it.
I'm Sherry Easley, I'm legislative aide.
Ira Perman, aide.
Amy Buffy.
Bill Starr.
Jim Steve.
Elby Bridges.
Dick Trey.
Paul Holman.
Ernie Hall. Bill Evans. Chris Shady, Director of Economic and Community Development.
Lisa Slusner, Deputy Municipal Clerk.
Good. Bill,
Okay.
lead us through this Title 23 and your amendments, and we'll let Amy do her amendment.
Sure, and the reason for that, of course, is I have a fair number of them. They're out in front of you, and the best way to keep up is to reference in your packet that was provided by staff, which you'll need to keep, by the way, because I noticed they don't show up in your, they're not reprinting this for Tuesday night, which is nice to not waste that much paper. But just pragmatically, if you look at the top right corner of the packet, you'll see the page number, and that's 5 of 265, 172 of 265. That's what the carryover has been, as opposed to you're more familiar with the individual packet numbers in the right-hand corner at the bottom. I didn't have those at first because the packet's not put together. I want to preface a little bit. This is really a complicated chapter of industry, as well as the bundling of the oversight. If you look at the title, there's a bunch of them covered in here in terms of sort of some are routine code updates, and some of them are just kind of keeping up with what the United States is doing in general. I'm not going to preface whether that's the case, but what you see in the bundling, the reason it's so big is that it affects the plumbing code, the elevator code, the fire protection code, all of them kind of lumped into one big thing. And we've seen it both ways in my career here. I don't know if there's one way better or another. They're not typically as complicated as Title 21, so to break each one of them out doesn't make sense. I don't make excuses for jumping around. The way it jumped around was a couple of ways. As I put the word out to industry, I asked for comments and amendments. I have had, Ron Thompson has actually seen all of these. We sat down at length, and then a week and a half ago or better, we sat down with the administration and kind of read through them all from the logic perspective of what we had going. So nobody should be surprised. I'm going to jump into it, and it's a complicated thing, and I talk fast, but if we want to get through them all for purposes of saving time on Tuesday, I'll preface the conversation. There's about 3 of these that are probably going to be confrontational, debatable, not sure, opinionated. Any of those would apply for this, and I'll jump right into it. The first one on amendment number 1 is just that. IEC is the International Energy Conservation Code. International Conservation Code is the Department of Energy's DOE federal program that was sort of launched to the states in about 2006. 3 times prior, this body has not adopted the 2006, nor have we adopted the 2009, nor have we, in front of us, the 2012 adopted it. The International Energy Conservation Code is broken into 2 parts, residential and commercial. It's not blown up in any of our documents. You have to go and study it like I did, basically, from the ramifications of what's enjoined. So without debating too much in here, what I propose in and on page 172, again, you have to look at the R and the C in this. So if you look at my line, what I'm proposing on line 24, if you look at the R102 and R109, that's residential. So when you look at the energy efficiency code, conservation code, you have to have the nuances of R and C, residential and commercial. What I propose in this case is to go into the energy code and delete the residential sections 101 through 401, which basically would take out any application of the residential construction code as put to us by the Department of Energy, and that would remove the requirements for the energy code. I'm not going to explain to you or bore you with what all that is. It's fairly complicated when it comes into residential building. I will say that Alaska Home Builders Association put out a letter. Department of Energy's own numbers talk about increasing costs in our zone upwards of about $3,600 for new construction. I would venture to say it's more than that. But the Energy Conservation Code covers a tremendous number of things: insulation, ventilation, lighting, wiring. It's complicated, it's not blown out in our deal, so if you want to study up on it more, I can give you those resources. So I move to propose that residential. I leave commercial code alone. Amendment 2 focuses in on line 13 on the same page and 14. Inside the energy conservation code, there's specifications for lighting efficacy, window efficiency, lots of complicated stuff. I think the commercial industry is pretty grown up, a lot of new construction. Remember, the energy conservation code would apply to remodels and reconstruction and redevelopment projects. I think that in my case, we're not bifurcating the entire code out, but I think the commercial industry is ready to come to bear with it, with these 2 exceptions. I want to leave out the exterior lighting requirements, and I also, well, I'll talk to the next one briefly. Exterior lighting, I mean, we've seen the gamut. We've seen high pressure sodium, metal halide, now LEDs. I'm thinking that the technology needs to advance a little bit more before you tell a guy to replace a $500 fixture. It's bad enough in the residential code that we went to what they call compact fluorescence. That was all the rage. Now LED bulbs are all the rage. Prices all over the board. So in this case here, I think that the lighting requirements, brighter is better with our winter climate in particular. I think if we start mandating lighting castings and LED fixtures and all that in the commercial industry, they're not going to know what to do, and it's very, very expensive. Inside the commercial code is another requirement for mixed-use development. If you have commercial and residential, one of the nuances inside the commercial energy conservation code is separate metering for your residential. For some reason, somebody wants to keep track of how much residential consumption of energy you would have in a mixed-use building. If you're going to redevelopment structure, just from my experiences, it's very hard to separate meter residential and break it out from commercial. A lot of these leases are written, utilities included. Landlords don't have separate metering capabilities. And my point here is if you're going to require separate metering for the residential component inside of a commercial building, what are you going to do with the data? Can you control the energy consumption, perhaps? Force some of that energy conservation code. To me, it's borderline the government trying to tell us kind of what car to drive, how fast to drive, how bright to run our lights, and I think we've crossed over into that, and I just don't see it. So make note that the energy conservation code, as it would be amended, is one of those areas of the 3 that's probably slightly controversial. I don't know that number 3 is. If you look at page 25 of 265, this one here is trying to get with probably what's practiced more than anything. These are exemptions of when you need a plumbing permit. You don't need to put in a water closet, a bidet, or a urinal, including a flushometer valve, which is the automatic flusher and all that. You don't need a permit for that. I propose adding water heaters to that list where we wouldn't need to go down and get a water heater and the corresponding inspection that comes with it. I think the industry is well served through the do-it-yourself stores. They're not entirely complicated as much as they are, and they're getting better. They're more automatic pilot lights. You don't have that explosion factor, some of the other things that kick in. So that's proposed. On page 149, told you I was going to go fast. Another nuance, which is in the fire code. I'm a little suspect of the word, and we're on line, on page 149 of 265. We're on line 2, and if you'll notice on the end of that line, there's an S, turnaround. In Chugiak Eagle River and Upper Hillside particularly, if you have a driveway in excess of 150 feet, you have to accommodate fire turnaround and truck backing up facilities, which I don't really mind. I think that's exactly appropriate. But I think that the enforcement of having multiple ones as referred by the S is what I'm trying to correct. So line 2 basically says if you have a driveway over 150 feet and before 220, by the way, if you have that, it's one turnaround. And again, on line 5, it references turnouts and turnarounds. So I'm trying to focus that in terms of singularity. It's awfully complicated to build more than one of those for that. So again, I don't know if that's controversial or not. Amendment number 5 on page 55 is basically, we would modify current code. Current code allows for, it's a table of fees, basically, if I remember right. on 55, we're talking about, the half-hour inspection, being allowed for $75. This impacts our user groups or our customers, if you will, two different ways. In the commercial sector and some residential complicated building, actually, consumers are required to prepay inspections, upwards of 150 of them or 200 of them inside their building packet. So you basically, multiply the number of required inspections and prepay all of those ahead of time. So the upfront cost can be fairly steep. But I see practice out in the field is more of a bundling affair, multiple inspections at once, as well as some of these inspections just don't take an hour. So the idea that we go back to what's currently in code might be somewhat controversial, but I think that it would kind of force the efficiencies. If we're restricted to our building officials only being able to do 1 per hour, the next request is going to be additional staffing or overtime and all the other things, if that becomes the new standard. Not saying they won't do it, but I just feel like if we're going to collect for that. There is a rebate at the end of the project. If you didn't use all 165 prepaid inspections and only used 150, you can apply for a credit. But again, I'm thinking it's going to all come out in the wash. If you get the $75 prepays on the books in some capacity or another, some inspections are complicated, no question. Framing inspection on a residential home takes a while, but some of the other ones, blast in there, check the wiring on a panel or a change order. I don't think you need to hit a guy for $150. Page 39. I actually left my notes at home, so I'm going to have to refresh myself on get to 39. Oh, yeah, this whole concept of page 39 is line 22 versus 26. I propose taking out the opportunity for express plan review. There's two observations that I've had when particularly some of my customers have had express plan review. The line that talks about due to limited resources, the department can make no guarantee on the availability of express plan review services. That's problematic for me, especially if you took 10% or 15% more money up front to sort of fast track or put the perception out there that express plan service is available. I think if we're going to collect the money, we ought to do it. It becomes very cumbersome, however, to get the plans in the queue, throw change orders in there. The other thing that's happening is electronic plan review, I think, is going to solve some of this stuff. So what my amendment says is let's chuck that whole concept of express plan reviews and everybody pays the same rate. No one has that sort of, oh, I paid extra, I get to the head of the line conversation. So I basically propose to delete that language. Flipping the page over to 40 through 41. Excuse me, page 40 and 41. It starts at line 21. I need to explain this one just a little bit. As Mr. Schutte recognized, some of this code evolved over time. The site condo arrangements and some of the other issues were probably where this originated. But what it says is essentially that if you're a developer or a builder construction permit out, if you have one out and you're having trouble with that one, or it's in debate, or might be in front of the building board, or something like that, it's to the right of the building official to not give you another permit for something else. And to me, that's frustrating that they would hold an upcoming project hostage because you were sort of a bad performer or have an issue with another project. I have a builder friend that described a scenario where he was building McDonald's at Tohoto Commons and had an issue with what the underfloor heating requirements were for the drive-through lanes. And so they were fighting with that. They had to review the plans and all this stuff, and it became somewhat friction-driven for certain. And the building official pulled this quote and would not allow a remodel at another building in town. Legitimate builder does all the other stuff. I think that's a tremendous amount of authority, and it's a heavy hammer. So what I'm saying right now is I would either like to pull back the authority that the building official can hold hostage an upcoming permit, or not. So I essentially say let's delete from line 21 all the way through. And if you read it, it's really the building official. And I think really, Ms. Johnson probably remembers the site condo people. There was limited mechanisms we could shut those people down that were just continuing to wade through with junk in those early years of figuring out that service product. So I'm at this point saying, if you don't like the permit application, don't approve it. but don't hold it hostage because you've got a poor performance somewhere else. On page 12, which talks about the confirmations, we still weren't able to confirm this unequivocally. But I would like, especially now at the advent of Title 21 and the expanded authorities that we're seeing under the name of the building official, what I propose here through this amendment number 8 is on page 12, that the building official shall be appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the assembly. And I believe with the amount of the authority and qualifications, uniquely qualified, but also perhaps want to do a background check if applicants are coming in from out of state. Did they have trouble somewhere else? Are they contractors? Are they lawyers? What credentials do we feel is valuable to implement the policies both in Title 21 that empower heavily with the building official, and then just like every other appointment that has significant interaction with departments and public, I would want to weigh in on who that is. So again, looking at a confirmation hearing of some kind, just basically approval from the assembly, and maybe a public hearing related thereof. It's a pretty powerful position as we get right down to it. Page 138 is just simple technical things, looking at the various codes. This is inside your crawl space. Basically, I'm encouraging that they put a GFI breaker in the crawl space. It's required to have a light and an outlet in the crawl space. With some of this ventilation and weatherproofing and all that, I think people are going to start plugging in fans downstairs and all kinds of other things, and to have a wet surface location without a GFI protection would make sense to do. So a lot of these are local amendments too. I want to back up just a little bit. We're not going in and modifying, in most cases, the IBC, the International Building Code, directly. What's happened in most of our situations, and most of these, is that they're what the department heads have determined as local amendments. They're over and above the code. They're changes to the specifications. The code may say 4 times air exchange or 5 times air exchange is allowed in a home, basically the leaking capacity. Local amendment says, no, we want our homes to be tighter, we'll only get 4 air exchanges per hour kind of concept. So this is where the local amendment thing kicks in, and to me that's a local amendment that says, hey, you can leave the IBC alone, but I want to locally amend it. On 149, this is another one that's complicated because the entire chapter isn't blown out, and I would hope staff to research out this, but in the elevator code, there's a reference in specifications for standardized keys and accessibility keys. And if you put it in this one, 607.4, in this particular location on line 24, then it's going to be redundant to deeper in code somewhere else on 607.5. But if you went in here and you tried to find 607.5, it's not in here because the way this is written, they're just blowing out the changes. 607.5, I believe, is where all this whole thing should be moved over. It talks about Knox box keys for the fire department, it talks about building management keys, lockable entrances and all that stuff. And I get it. You read this and understand what's going on. The elevator inspectors are having challenges. The elevator repairmen are having trouble finding keys. And but if you've been in an elevator, I don't want to be able to open up that box and see all your building keys inside the cab of the elevator. So that's not what this proposes, but standardize it. And I think the answer for me is to standardize it under 607.5 under a new section of code in a different place. Trust me that it exists. Page 150, we're getting there. Line 11. Ms. Johnson probably knows this because she's moved this amendment before. It repeals the local amendment for pit sprinklers, under cab pit sprinklers. You have the long shafts, such as we have 8-floor elevators here. It would require that at the very bottom level below the cab, you have to put a fire sprinkler. And it's the concept that trash may catch on fire or something else may burn. You know, somebody decides to throw a cigarette down between the little things and it catches on fire. I don't find that to be the most effective way. I'd rather have a cleaning policy or inspection. It's really expensive, especially if you don't have fire sprinkler, if you have an exemption or you don't have it anywhere nearby. We already have, because of rubber belts and some of the compliance requirements, we don't allow sprinklers above the cabs. for a lot of different reasons. One of them is you wouldn't want the sprinklers to go on, flood the people inside the cab, take your elevator out of service, people burning it on fire inside. So I'm not trying to get in the face of the fire folks here that need that protection, but this one's very expensive and doesn't serve the purpose that I can tell. So thanks for the second on that, Ms. Johnson.
I think he did the same for me a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I remember and it passed, and so we're basically trying to put it back in, now we're trying to take it back out and keep it the way it is enforced now. 166 is a little bit of a nuance. You have to understand what this means. You have a little bit of the issue in Upper Hillside, but inside our fire service fees and fire charges, if there's a fire dispatch outside the fire service area, in my area, up above mile 6, Eagle River Road, you get outside the fire service area. Some of the Upper Hillside areas are outside the fire service area. And if you read what's in the enforcement section, it says the municipality shall have the right to bring suit for collection of these charges plus costs and attorney fees, meaning they're gonna go back to the property owner and really gig it to them if in fact charges were incurred. There's a lot of reasons fire starts. Vandalism, a wildfire gets out of the way, your neighbor blew trash over, lightning strikes. I want to sort of have an internal conversation where the assembly, if somebody says, hey, look, you're going to bankrupt me if you enforce a $15,000 or $20,000 fire service charge. Granted, if the guy started the fire and then he had a burn pit that got out of whack, fine, but the Upper Cluton area had a burn fire many years ago, and it wasn't unequivocal, was it a campfire from a trespasser or was it him getting out of control? And I would not want to enforce and run a citizen out of, we incur the fees certainly, but I want to have an appeal mechanism for being able to that, and I say bring it to us. Amendment 13 is sort of, and this is a new section, it's not anywhere in here, I don't quite know exactly where to put it. But my concept in here is sort of the service matrix. How are we doing? An exit interview with the people that are paying big fees, and a mechanism that allows us to do that. I don't take entire credit for it, but one of the things that we've done is we've codified quarterly summary reports of our financials, of our overtime, of our travel. Ms. Gray Jackson and I and those that have done the buddy, that didn't always exist. We get those quarterly because the assembly says we want to see that data tracked quarterly. What I'm proposing here is that we have some sort of service matrix. It exists, but I'd like it to be relatively independent. The freedom of speech for these folks to say, hey, I just wrote a check for $12,000 and I got lousy service. How does that feedback come through that's not filtered by the department or not made light of? What I'm proposing in this case is that anybody that pulls a permit for more than $5,000 worth of work has a mechanism tracked ideally through a standardized system electronically. Hansen Systems getting ready to be able to do it. But I also want sort of the internal auditor to track this so there's no filtering, no intimidation, no whatever, and we start to see customer service. And in my aspects, it'd be helpful to have feedback. Right now, some of them are calling us. Mr. One is getting the calls every now and then. I didn't have a good experience. And for me, it's not a matter of trying to say, wow, that was awful, but how can we make it better? What can we do to make it better? Amendment 14, and the last one relates, it's very specific, brought to me by industry, which talks about the availability for temporary buildings. We are burdensome on our development community because oftentimes it takes 2 building cycles to get approvals and get construction started. That's what I'll start with, is that right now, current code says you can have a temporary building, an ATCO trailer, a construction trailer, tent fabric covered storage facility for 180 days, and you can apply one more time for 360 days of total time for a temporary building. After that, no more. What I want to say is if the year's transpired and you've got a legitimate reason why you want to keep that facility there, maybe a temporary office turns into a construction trailer, that temporary building can stay at approval of the building official. That's all I have. We sort of chatted about the forum for this to be just what it was, a presentation of it. I don't like to debate with staff. I don't particularly like that. It's ultimately our call on just what we do come Tuesday night. I would like to pass it. There's a reason to move so much more of the code forward. It modernizes the city, but it's a fine line between being burdensome additional regulations already in an industry that's heavily impacted. So I studied it, and Title 21 has some similarities to it. These are very specific, as you remember from our work session 6 weeks ago when they brought in the modeling of bird blocking and all the other stuff. But Title 23 is where the cost incurs for development projects to meet compliance, and it's expensive. So, there you go. Thanks for your time.
Richard Shooting, comments on amendments?
Plenty of them. Would you like me to go through them one by one?
If you would.
Okay. So we had a chance to sit down
Mr. Chair?
with Assembly Member Starr.
Sure.
Yes, sir.
Is there, I might add, this might be quicker on this lengthy of Mr. Starr's amendments. Are there any in here that the department or officials here would be okay with and wouldn't contest? So
Yeah.
maybe if you
I'll
start.
probably
with
go
those.
through it twice as fast as he did.
Okay.
Go ahead. Good.
Thank you.
So we had a chance to go over these and look at the genesis of what the changes are, why they're proposed, and then we sat down with staff in development services, we sat down with staff in fire. We have representatives from AHSC present. We sat down with them, particularly on the energy code, energy conservation code, and we've got the following comments. So on amendment number 1, this one is an interesting one. It is more costly to add energy conservation to a home up front, but over the lifespan of the home, especially for the end user, it ultimately ends up being cheaper, and it has lower maintenance costs in the long run. There was a very good point made by representatives from the Anchorage Home Builders Association about a potential conflict between AHFC financed homes, which have to be held to a standard that AHFC has adopted versus our own standard, and that was a good thing to highlight. Our proposal is that we keep the energy conservation code in place for homes, but that administratively we can find a policy or put a policy in place that will allow homes that are financed by AHFC. That energy, that inspection for the AHFC financing will satisfy the MOA requirements, so that there won't be this need for conducting the AHFC required inspection and the MOA required inspection. We agree that would be cumbersome. So we'd like to propose that we keep the energy conservation code in place, but we will institute a policy that will allow AHFC financed homes to be inspected once, and for that to satisfy the MOA requirements. And that would not need to happen in code. So on Amendment 1, with that policy in place, we recommend denial of that change. On Amendment number 2, this is a two-parter, and we've got a split answer on this one. On item number 1, which is line 13, in reviewing the recommendations of the IECC Code Review Committee, these were the bodies that spent months reviewing these codes and making the recommendations. They were the ones that proposed that particular section or that deletion, and so we recommend denial of that portion of the amendment. On line 14, though, the separate metering, we thought that was a great idea. We recommend approval of that portion of the amendment. Number 3, this is the water heater one. We had an interesting discussion about this one. I consulted both the development services staff and the fire staff on this one, particularly the plumbing inspectors. Both disciplines felt that it does represent a significant enough risk to health and safety based on the number of calls they've had on, particularly on CO2 failure, people who aren't venting their water heaters correctly. But there have also been fires related to people who are installing incorrectly. And so homeowners, they are allowed to replace their own water heater, but the purpose of having the inspection is to ensure life safety issues. And so both the plumbing inspectors and the fire inspectors have recommended that we do not adopt this change. And truth be told, many of us have replaced water heaters on our own and didn't.
I was going to ask you, have you ever done that on your own without a permit?
Cleo, plug your ears. Yes, I have.
Thank you.
Amendment number 4. This is the turnaround and turnouts. Again, this is a two-parter, and we went over it with fire, and we agreed with Mr. Starr's amendment that a single turnaround on driveways 150 feet or less is acceptable, and so we recommend approval of that change. However, because there's too many unknowns with driveways that are longer, particularly in hillside where there's unknown topography, et cetera, they recommended denial of that change and offered some substitute language that might, and I'll share with you offline, Bill, that actually accomplishes both and might be acceptable to you, that doesn't mandate multiples, but gives that flexibility should the topography require it.
To the building official?
No, for the fire official. Only on the driveways that are longer than that, they're 200 feet or longer. And that way, it's not required, it's not mandated, it's not plural in code, but it does, where needed, it does allow them that flexibility to mandate that.
Yeah, and I just have a conversation about that. One of the things about having specific code is that it's sort of what it speaks to. When you have the flexibilities or subject to the building official, you inherently, which the criticism that I've heard is that it's either not predictable or it takes a lot of time to negotiate. So when you don't have a specified or the solution, I'm appreciative of that, it sends the developer or the home builder or somebody back to the planning department for a conversation that usually requires you to bring your architect, your land planner, maybe a change. So I'm all over that concept of having the discussion later on, but what in practice happens is that you maybe slow it down to pay your architect, have to do a reorder, a change order, and I guess I'm more about having specific letter of law code when you can. I appreciate the answer.
Yeah, and it's a tough one.
Yeah, it is.
You can't cover every case with code language, so that is a tough one. Amendment number 5, this one's tough for us because it is extremely difficult to keep track of time in half-hour increments. We, like Assemblyman Carr indicated, we don't necessarily want to get in a debate on it, but it would be our recommendation that it not be approved. That being said, we would of course figure out how to work with it if it worked. Amendment number 6.
We do it now though, right, Mr. Schutte?
What's that?
We have $75 charges now.
Let me defer to where she goes, Sharon or Ross?
Yes, half-hour inspections exist in the code currently.
There we go. Number 6. This was the, I'm sorry, Bill, I forget, was this the, oh yeah, that one we're fine with.
Number 6.
Go ahead and delete that section.
The express.
The availability of the express plan review, that language, that's fine. Amendment number 7. This was the example he gave about McDonald's. We certainly we understand the argument against, for that amendment. However, it is an important tool for those particular developers or builders that are problematic. You could have, I hate to use his name, but you could have Lee Baker building a McDonald's, and we've got an issue with that. And he's building another McDonald's down the road somewhere. I can certainly understand the fear of retribution or holding up multiple projects, but it's also an effective tool. And as Bill indicated, it did come from past experience, both in the lot line, zero lot line houses and in other experiences. We would recommend that amendment not be approved and leave that flexibility in there for the building official to deal with those.
Chair,
No.
can I ask a question on that? What would be the difference of having that tool than if the builder, let's say Lee Baker, is doing a McDonald's and there's a problem with this McDonald's, and this permit over here is really better? I mean, wouldn't it be a case-by-case permit review? I mean, your permit is really what you're going after versus.
So a lot of times, and I'll defer to Ross when we introduce it. A lot of times what happens is this is, as Bill indicated, in the middle of a project. So past the permit approval stage and you've already started construction and you're halfway through it, and then you discover problems that are systemic throughout that entire builder's inventory. And this tool allows that kind of stoppage. But Ross, am I allowed to ask Ross to clarify that?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so realistically, that tool rarely ever gets used, but occasionally you'll get an individual that just, doesn't want to close out their old projects. That they'll just let them languish. And so we'll use that tool to basically, rather than go down the road of finding someone, which we don't want to go down that road, we'll use this tool and say, well, we're not going to issue you any more building permits until you close out these projects that have like one inspection item that needs to be completed. That's basically how that tool is used.
I have a question about, what about a matter that's trying to be resolved in court or in front of the building board, or, you know, you have a lot of issues that are perhaps not out of the control of.
Exactly, that's why that tool is important, because the building official has latitude. He can say, oh, you're tied up in court, okay, we'll issue this permit and we'll let this project work itself out.
And the
Or
language,
not.
the language is may use this, exception. It's not a shall.
I get
So it's
that.
not everybody who has to finish one.
It just sounds like a weapon, that's all. Thank you.
Okay. Next one, sir?
Amendment number 8, we, I'm on the fence on this, we recommend denial because it seems redundant. All department heads are already approved by the assembly, so it seems redundant because the building official was approved by the assembly when that person was appointed by the mayor. So it just seems like it's
Ma'am?
abstract.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Where do you find in the code that the building official is approved by the city?
Because we didn't find it.
Department heads, you couldn't find it, the
No.
department
No,
heads are appointed by the mayor and approved by the assembly,
Right.
and the building official is the department head
It's
for the Department of
considered a
Development
department
Services. Yeah, but again, it is
Of what department?
Development Services.
Okay.
Yeah, so it is unclear, we just thought it was
Thank
redundant.
you, Mr. Chairman.
But this would clean it up.
Could potentially create conflicts in the code. Amendment number 9, same reasoning. We recommend denial, but only because it's redundant. In an earlier section of the same part of code, it already required that all receptacles in a crawl space be GFI receptacles, so it just kind of saying the same thing over again. So just seems redundant.
Mr. Bowski?
I have to go back to the last one about the building official. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is, in the past, we've had a deputy department director who was the building official.
Right.
And I don't believe deputies have to be confirmed by the assembly.
That is correct, but that does not exist anymore.
Well, it doesn't mean it won't in the next administration.
That's also true.
So I think to Ms. Gray Jackson's point, we've had this consistent, from the assembly standpoint, when we're passing laws, trying to be abundantly clear in code so there's no ambiguity. So with that being the case, I don't think the administration can actually say that the building official will always be the department head.
I'm just saying that's the current situation. And so that is a good point. That could be a potential situation down the road.
Yeah, because in the past, that's been the case. Okay.
Amendment number 10, for this one, if you're gonna ask detailed questions, I will ask Cleo to clarify, because this is a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, but in essence, they thought that doing the move that Assemblymember Starr recommends actually makes the overall section more confusing, because the subsection that you're recommending to move it to does not specifically call out fire service keys. So they thought it was fine the way it is, and moving it would move it to an unrelated section, nor would it cover fire service keys. The existing section, as drafted, does cover all elevator keys and gives the owner 2 years to comply with meeting those requirements, so they recommended denial of that change.
The fire service keys are specific to the elevators, though, in dot 4. And in dot 5, I think you're gonna find that they're more generic for the entire building safety. Knox boxes, general management keys, you know, all that. So my point on that, you're correct in sort of the fire service key, which elevators all have a ability to lock it out or lock it on, changes all what they call the fire service key for that unit. But so do other parts of the building in terms of being able to get at your mechanical rooms and all the other stuff. So my logic is just, I mean, I'm trying to be pragmatic here from a building perspective, is why would you have a whole separate key stash somewhere else mandated by the elevator service folks, and then a whole other key stash somewhere else mandated to cover the rest of the building? It seems cumbersome. It might be confusing both ways, Mr. Schutte, I don't know, but it's not practical code from a building owner's perspective.
But is it an emergency situation? I mean, I can see where they need to get to.
Can I ask, does a Knox box have the elevator key in it?
It does not.
Okay. I don't know, Mr. Steele. But if you look, you spend the time and go to the other section where I recommended read that too, because the argument is what they're saying is that it's confusing. But I didn't provide the blowout for the section that's not in our packet.
Right.
So if you wanna go, just Google 607.51 and you'll read it right away.
Mr. Shitty, India?
Yep. So number 11, this is the elevator pit sprinkler requirement. You heard the rationale as to why fire would not support the amendment in Mr. Starr's description of it. Pit maintenance of an elevator pit is not a high priority for most building owners, and yes, there is the likelihood of trash, debris, oil, et cetera, collecting in there. It is very flammable, so it does present a potential risk, and the fire department would recommend keeping this requirement in the code.
So what do you think, Jennifer?
I'm a co-sponsor.
So we recommend a denial of
Did you
this
go?
change. What's that?
Did you go?
Yeah.
Do you put your gum markers down the elevator?
Hydraulic fluid's not flammable.
Yeah,
I do not litter.
yeah, and hydraulic steel was,
So amendment number 12, this was an interesting dilemma that Assemblymember Starr alerted us to. I asked Fire to evaluate it, which they did. At the end, they decided that it would not be a good policy to adopt this amendment simply because it shifts the burden of fire service from the property owner affected to the rest of the tax base. So if you're outside the fire service area, the cost of the fire service would fall to the property, to the taxpayers and not to the property owner.
And I'm just gonna evaluate, it isn't a debate, but remember, Chugiak Volunteer Fire Department, in those cases, they respond in kind. Oftentimes, they waive fees significantly. We oftentimes are servicing the Glen. Ambulance service fees fall into a little different category, but those who've been on the body long enough know that we've got a mechanism in there to relieve ambulance service fees. And so, the idea that a fire and the way a fire started is out of control of the property owner would be the latitude for the appeal to us.
Amendment 13, this is an interesting one because we're all on the same page with the outcome or the product, which is improved customer satisfaction and especially customer service metrics. We were a little bit unclear on the methodology though, so we felt it was a good idea, but maybe not fully articulated enough. Assemblymember Starr, no disrespect to the way that you worded it. So perhaps this could be one that could be improved and not included as part of the code, but could be implemented through OMB or some other entity where we already have existing metrics and measurements. So let's improve the ones we've got and figure out how to keep that separation that we agree with. Keep the customer input separate from the department somehow.
Yeah, and can I just speak to my amendment a little bit more? Sorry, Mr. Jackson, but what we needed to do when we did the financial amendments and the changes was to put it in a specific standard. Travel, Mr. Holman remembers these, I remember these, we would get sort of a travel summary, different every time, and we would argue about it, and they would say, well, that was already in our budget, we didn't put it in our travel budget, we didn't put it in the travel report. So in saying that you don't want to put it in code, my experience, the best success was when we did put it in code. And the budget requirements for every quarter budget to actual spending, the travel budgets, the overtime budgets, all of that is in code. We worked hard to get that in a specific standard. And some of them go over and above in the administrations, and some of them just give us what we need in terms of that. But you see reports specific to spending over $30,000 or sole source agreements or all that. All of that's in code. So the idea that we could have some sort of policy, I'm probably not going to let up on the service matrix for this department itself. It's important. So thank you. I didn't cut you off.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a suggestion to both Mr. Starr and Mr. Schutte, because I think it's a really good idea. But how about making it part of the annual audit plan? Because there are annual audits that have to happen every single year. How about making this one of them?
To capture
my suggestion.
To capture
Thank you,
the
Mr.
data,
Chairman.
what I'm trying to get is a feedback mechanism, and I will take your advice, Mr. Jackson, but the ability to capture the data from the users, the customers, if you will, is what I'm targeting. Is what mechanism do we poll them? Do we ask them to send them a letter? Do they have a way to get on the computer and fill out their experience? good, bad, or otherwise.
If I can follow up, Mr. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Starr, I think that that's a possibility.
No.
That can happen through the audit process, failing audit process, I mean, because those are the folks who are gonna be topics to do, prepare a report on an annual basis to the Assembly and the Mayor.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Starr.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Schuler?
Yeah, thank you, that's a great idea. Moving on, amendment number 14, we recommend approval of this change. It does give some added flexibility to the building official in one-off circumstances where APCOs need to stick around longer than 180 days.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Bowski, you got some amendments, right?
I just have two, and they're nothing new. We had a whole other work session on these two topics. One has to do with bird blocking, and the other has to do with the sheetrocking and unfinished basements. So the First Amendment has to do with the bird blocking. The reason I brought it forward is because I think the industry demonstrated that the policy change that was adopted a few years ago has resulted in mold damage and ice damming, specifically because of the ventilation issue. So this would give an alternative method, an option to basically go back to the way that we used to do it. And the second one has to do with the sheetrocking and the unfinished basements. So those are my two amendments. I don't think we rehashed them. I think we spent an hour and a half on them last time. So those are just the two, and I figured the body will make their decision.
Mr. Schuler, did you look at these two amendments?
Yes, we looked at them and commented on them previously.
Okay.
Would you like more commentary or?
If you just summarize your.
Summarize it for us.
Well, okay, I will summarize. Which one do you want to do first? The second one or the first?
Bird blocking.
Bird blocking. We heard lots of words thrown around in the last work session that many of us don't understand because not all of us are engineers, but in essence, the resistance to this amendment by the department stems from the fact that it negatively affects the overall structural integrity of the home to follow this methodology. And that currently some of the other concerns about the ventilation and the ice dams that can form on roofs can be alleviated through other methods.
So I have to just come back. So when you say it negatively impacts the structural integrity of the home, so what you're saying is all prior to, I think the change was adopted in 2006 originally. So prior to 2006, did we have homes that every single beam, every single truss failed?
Chair.
Is that where we're going? I mean, because what we're talking about is ventilation and the way it's been done. It was done for 40 years.
Yeah, and we're talking about structural, and we're actually experiencing an example of how the structural integrity of the building can falter because of the lack of connection between the roof and the wall itself, and that's the Roma gym. We just had a big shake. What ended up happening is that the roof portions of the gym are not properly affixed to the walls, in essence, and what ended up happening is that the walls are now able to torsionally move because they are separate from the structural assembly of the roof.
Sure. Now, I'm not a builder, but I think you're taking an apple and an orange here. When we're talking about the way the ventilation is happening, whether it's the 2-inch gap or the holes in a residential structure specifically, no one has demonstrated one example of where we've had every truss break because that's how they did construction for 40 years. So when I hear people come to us and they talk about the significant mold damage or ice damming that's happening, and having to go back in and spend $20,000 to fix, somebody's roof, that's significant to a homeowner. So I'm trying to figure out. I mean, I'm not talking about Roma. It has a different type of construction. I'm talking about residential. So I guess if you could come forward Tuesday night with an example or multiple examples in the past 4 years of where exactly all these trusses are broken, because I think when you say structural integrity, that's essentially what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think we could do that right now if you like. I don't know off the top of my head, Ross, I don't know how many buildings have ever failed because of that, but you would.
Well,
Go ahead, Ross.
listening through the chair, thank you. Listening to Amy, there's real confusion on this issue here, and I think I could ask a few questions to everybody on the assembly, and I would come back with the result that, and this is no offense, that nobody really understands what's going on with this issue, okay? Right now, under current code, for a simple house like the homes that Spinell builds, you can drop every truss block 2 inches to allow airflow into the attic to provide adequate ventilation. And the reason you can do that on that simple house is because the forces that are being transferred between the roof diaphragm and the walls are low enough that you don't need to have that super good positive connection between this blocking and the roof, the walls and the roof, okay? Imagine a cardboard box with no lid on it, and the bottom of it's fixed. And you push your finger against the cardboard box, what happens? The walls, it'll warp, it'll deflect. Now take that same cardboard box and put a lid on it where the lid is continuously fixed to all the sides. And you push your finger against that box, what happens? Nothing happens. It's not going to deflect. It's way more rigid. That's the role that the roof of a house plays in terms of holding the house together. And the design of the connection between the roof and the walls is not so important on a really simple house, as we found, but when you start getting into much more complicated houses, you know, the prettier homes, the higher end homes that they're building that have much more complicated roofs, the forces can become a lot higher between the roof diaphragm and the walls. And at certain times it becomes important that that connection actually be designed, okay? And the way handout 13 or whatever it's called right now works is it gives designers flexibility. If my forces are low, I could drop all my blocking and I'm guaranteed I'm going to have enough ventilation. If my forces are high, I have to start looking at alternate solutions to provide adequate ventilation and transfer my forces. And there's options on there where additional blocking can be installed inside the attic or outside the attic, but it still allows for that continuous 2-inch airspace to let enough air through for ventilation. Now, I haven't seen how your amendment's worded, but from what I assume, it's basically going to allow designers and builders to just completely ignore the fact that under certain situations, under certain designs, I don't have to account for these forces, which is throwing out structural engineering.
I've got Mr. Evans has a comment.
Can I,
Mr. Evans, sir?
can I ask you to answer the original question though? Do we have evidence of homes that have failed or roofs that have failed because of lack of blocking?
Not that I'm aware of, but then again, also, houses in Anchorage have not been tested. We have not had anything close to a design earthquake. The thing that hit a few weeks ago, the accelerations and the forces experienced in Anchorage are nothing compared to what we can expect under a design earthquake.
Okay, thanks,
Mr.
Rob.
Evans?
As I understood your comments, you were talking about how certain, simpler homes don't necessarily need that reinforced structure. But the thing is, the triggers for this method are seismic activity and wind activity. So there's certain areas of town, certainly the hillside and others, that have the wind speed regularly that are going to trigger this. And it's going to trigger it whether it's a simple house or a complex house. That's sort of the issue, is that, if there are houses by design whose roofs are more susceptible to wind issues or seismic issues, maybe you need something special for that. But the way I understand it is the way it's proposed is that if you have a house on a hillside, if it's basically a little low trailer with a real simple roof, it would still have to have the same protection. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. The way it works currently is that the designer or the structural engineer provides a calculation showing what the forces are that are being transferred between the roof diaphragm and the walls. And if those forces are below a certain threshold, they get to just simply drop all their blocks 2 inches. Now, when the roof gets more complicated and the forces go above this threshold, then they got to start looking at other options to both transfer the force and ventilate.
So the builders basically do that engineering analysis for each home and determine the structural forces and what's required.
Correct.
Mr. Starr and then Mr. Steele. Mr. Starr.
And I made a pledge this isn't going to be a debate, but there's a lot of
We got 5 minutes left. It
supposition
won't be debate.
in this particular case, blocking would have to fail. The home industry is not saying we don't want to block. We don't want to support the trusses from racking. We don't want to implode the structure in any capacity, they're putting the labor into it. And there's other factors that would go into it. And it could be steel strapping. You can accommodate through steel strapping, through additional hold-down mechanism designs, all sort of other phenomenon to address sort of the structural issue. They're focusing in on what they've seen in the field with themselves through the mold in the roof, the lack of airflow, the requirements to say, we gotta get some more air in there, because they've had to go back and do warranty. They've had to fix this sort of stuff. And I'll tell you, no matter what, argument or not, the city never gets sued in any of this. So if the roof membrane blows off, diaphragm fails or whatever, there's gonna be lawsuits, and the city's not named party to any of it. So the builders have a lot on the line here, as well as the architects and the designers. The city doesn't have. So what I've seen this argument evolve into is more of a matter of wills than the expert in the field who actually bears the full responsibility. So, and read the amendment. It's prescriptively braced walls, engineered shear wall designs for 1 and 2 family dwellings and townhomes. This configuration is option 5. There's 4 others to choose from. They get to choose it, give them some more flexibility is what I think the industry asked for. They've come to us, they've talked about it. They're not trying to shortcut anything, folks. They want a solution to a very expensive problem.
Mr. Steele.
Yeah, it seems to me that the more rigid it is, the more susceptible it is to damage in an earthquake, because there's no give. And so, you know, the fact that they have an option, as you said, to argue their case in terms of whether or not they want to put complete blocking or whether they want to leave the event. If they really do have that option and it's used, then it's a moot point as far as I'm concerned. They can do what's the right thing to do for that particular structure.
Mr. Honeman?
So why do we need it?
I can appreciate Mr. Starr's comment about isolating to a specific structure, and again, not to go into debate, but the biggest concern I have is that if we leave it all only to the builder, then we're at a point where some of the homes that were built in the 70s and 80s, and I know Mr. Plasker, you're talking about 30, 40 years we built things certain ways, but they weren't always the best either. I mean, there's so much crap that had gone up because we were in a hurry to build to catch up with the growth of our community, that things were kind of looked the other way. The site condos being one of them, but that's, I think I'm okay with the exception, but I would also want that to be not a carte blanche, but more of a, hey, let's take a look at it and make sure that it is that it's not outside the realm of this exception. So if that makes sense.
I think for your point, Mr. Starr made the point, when you read the code, this would add a 5th option to how they deal with these sorts of issues. So,
But would it be automatic if the builder says, I'm using code 5, and then that's the way it goes? Or can somebody have to look at it and say, yeah, it meets code 5?
No, it would be one of the allowables. And I think the whole point is, when you talk about failure, and we talk about buildings in the 70s, you have to remember, when, you know, we set trusses up on our place up in Willow, you know, it would be an incredibly unusual situation to have a catastrophic failure where every single truss fails. And in fact, the administration department can't name one. And that's my point, is we're kind of going above and beyond. And when we recognize, you know, we tried this in 2006, 2007, whenever they started, and what they're seeing is significant problems with mold and ice damming. We've created a problem where there wasn't one before. And so what I'm trying to do is say, you know what, sometimes we pass laws to do something, and we create problems that are worse. And I think in this case, they were trying to be overly cautious, and we see that there has been damage that has been very, very costly to homeowners. And so what I'm saying is, we have no example of these catastrophic failures, but what we do know is the code that was changed in 2006 has created more problems. So let's just give them an option to go back and do something that has never been proven not to be safe in Alaska and Anchorage.
Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I've actually talked to, I have a very, very close friend of mine who's a carpenter, and he said they've had to go back and rework some houses because of mold, and some of these houses were 10 or 12 years old. So I think mold is much more of a problem than total collapse. And so I'll be supporting this.
Mr. Chairman, just before
Through
you
that
close.
HC here, I wanted to hear from them. I'm going to extend this work session.
Well, it's on the energy code, but the packet needs to have this included in it because this handout needs to be carried over to Tuesday. It's not a packet.
Who's here from the HFC? You are?
Several of us. Hello, Mr. Chairman, members of the Assembly. I'm not sure that we have any issues regarding,
No dog in this fight?
well, until you guys actually do something, we're not sure. Our standards and our codes are in place. We're statutorily required to do what we do. We are actually going to our board next Wednesday for the adoption of the 2012 IRC with our Alaska-specific amendments to that. Currently, our building energy efficiency standard is the 2012 IECC with Alaska-specific amendments. So, removing the IECC on your aspect could complicate inspectable items through the IRC of the physical inspections of the CO portion. If we go with Mr. Schuete's recommendation, we do not have an issue, we believe. Again, our standard is very commonly used in the practice. We hold in excess of 25% of the mortgages in Anchorage. It's very common with the builders. I believe it is what they would like to see. And what we're trying to do is just make sure that we align and have that same standard. We just don't want one code or separate meanings of that code or two separate codes is what our goal is.
Mr. Starr.
Well, what he sort of said is that there's an overall, an Alaska standard that already applies to this. And so with the nuance in the letter, which I was hoping to get home builders to send it out again, is the nuance of the code is that what I believe to be the case is you're going to get a whole nother layer in here that is going to be confusing over what's going to be standard practice confused. It's being approved now, the home builders comply with it, and then you put in, for example, the requirement to provide the certification. I mean, really, you're going to make everybody do a certification, 25% of the loans? Now,
That's
my
why we
law,
removed it.
Exactly right. So, this is where the nuance of the law becomes really problematic, is that you have a requirement at the end of a building cycle, if they need an energy 5-star rating or whatever the program used to be in the past, you used to have to balloon your house and have a flow rating done on it, a certification. If we pass this IECC for residential, every home that gets that has to have that certification, whether you need it or not. 25% of the loans require it, the other 75 may or don't. So it's those sort of things that we do, and inadvertently, yeah, so what? Put the certificate on the wall. I never certificated my house because my builder and lender didn't ask for it.
Well, but where that puts you in jeopardy, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, through the chair, where that puts it in jeopardy is the analysis and the data that we do have is homes resell on average of every 7 years. So that puts that resale in jeopardy of having our financing available for a potential new owner in 7 years.
But it never prevents you from coming back and certificating your house after the fact.
Very
and all the other
complicated,
stuff.
very complicated and very costly.
Mr. Chairman, this is what I didn't want to have happen, was an argument of wills and all the other things, but you can't go into this with just, sort of that casual reading. You just learned through this presentation that there's an Alaska standard, an Alaska energy code that works very well for our overall building safety, energy efficiency codes, whatever the motivation is to even have an energy code. Are we telling consumers that they have to conserve energy? Are we going to mandate it? Are we going to require it? Certainly, there's some practical reasons why we wanted to do it because of lending and housing and all the protections that go into that, but it's a fine line on where do we mandate. Right now, the certification requirement in the 2009 and 2006 is not mandatory. And so if you adopt 2012, you better get ready to say everything in 2009 and 2006, which we never passed, become applicable to. And that's why the home builders are saying it's not $3,500 per house, as the Department of Energy says. It's going to be more like $7,000 per house. And again, I don't know that we get a clear service product at the end of it, and I don't want that confusion either.
No, and Mr. I completely agree, and again, that's why concurrence or alignment is what does make sense of what we currently have in place as the pro facto statewide standard, although it's just an AHSC standard. But many of the topics you were just talking about as far as mold, ice damming, those are all addressed because of the energy code.
Well, but go into it deeper. Go into the efficiency of windows,
Exactly.
of the
I
viability
understand.
to go past an R19 in a wall. You can't get R19 in a wall without going to exterior sheeting. If you want to see mold problems, put external insulation on there, not done correctly. You're going to have
Absolutely.
mold on the outside barrier. So
We do
we
it all
have to
the
be
time.
really cautious here,
Right.
folks. And I appreciate the code review folks that went through all of this other stuff, but it's our job to make the rubber meet the road. And again, 14 amendments on a 600 and 700, that's not very many. I was restrained.
Well, thank you everybody for being here. This work session now.